Anyone who believes in indefinite growth on a physically finite planet is either mad or an economist.
We don't want to focus politics on a notion that involves the rejection of principles around which a large majority of our fellow citizens organize their lives.
We are not as endlessly manipulable and as predictable as you would think.
I've spent 30 years, more than 30 years, in journalism, trying to make sense of my country. But the lens through which I've viewed it is the news and current affairs lens. It offers, I think, an interesting but often quite a narrow perspective, and it can at times sort of miss the big picture. That lens also tends to focus on a familiar range of issues that are already framed by argument and prejudice. After much thought, I resolved that it should be an alphabet. 26 subjects, one for each letter. I thought today, if you'll allow me, I will take you on a whistle-stop tour of my journey from A to Z, my search for Britain, etc. So, A is for alcohol. A stiff whiskey to start me off. Now this chapter actually is about a common but mistaken belief that drink causes violence, and how that misconception lies behind Britain's very real problems with alcohol. Our belief that booze explains antisocial behaviour ultimately links the two, because what alcohol actually does is provide a sort of social timeout from certain codes of behaviour. The origins can be found in flower-strewn California in 1969, and the work of two researchers at the university there, Craig McAndrew and Robert Edgerton, who wrote a book called Drunken Comportment. If all alcohol causes violence, they hypothesized, it would do so in all societies where people drink alcohol. But actually, that's not what they found. I'm going to read a short extract from the book. McAndrew and Edgerton's book, Drunken Comportment, introduced readers to the Urubu Indians of Brazil, ferocious headhunters when sober, but partial to a song and dance with their enemies when drunk. Then there was the morose and somber Aratama tribe of northern Colombia, who grew more so on rum, their favourite drink. All conversation stops, the authors found, and gloominess sets in. The conclusion was that the way people behave when drunk is determined not by alcohol's toxic assault upon the seat of moral judgment, but by how their society responds to drunkenness. The book, Drunken Comportment, closes with a homily. Since societies, like individuals, get the sorts of drunken comportment that they allow, they deserve what they get. Britain's drink problems, it was suggested, were not the fault of drink, but of Britain. B is for Bobbies on the Beat. Now this chapter attempts to explode another myth, that the British bobby abandoned the beat. It was, in my view, the beat that abandoned the bobby. From the early 60s, Britain got into cars, and when they were not in their cars, they were sitting in their front rooms watching television. The pavements, once thronged with people, became deserted. And in the end, the local copper had to get into his car too. But my point is that TVs and cars have proved isolating technologies, and we need, I think, and argue, to work harder to replace what they have stolen. In our search for security, we fled the street, and in retreating, we ended up feeling less safe. We've tried to restore our confidence with barbed wire, anti-climb paint, and 1 million security cameras. But the effect has been to make us even more fearful. I remember filming on an estate in Yorkshire, where the central shopping area was dominated by a breeze block structure prickling with razor wire and CCTV cameras. The entrance reached via security turnstile. It turned out this was the community library. The more we emphasize the boundary between public and private space, the more vulnerable we feel. This chapter is really about authenticity, about heritage, and I suppose in all senses of the word about culture. In telling the story of Britain's cheese industry, the affluent middle classes entered the new millennium demanding real ale, slow food, organic turnips, and unbranded vintage fashion. They went to Glastonbury to dance in primeval mud, stopping off at the deli on the way home for a sourdough loaf, a bag of Egremont russets, and a chunk of dairy heritage. Urban chic sported clods of rural earth as farmers' markets and organic boxes headed to town. Localism became the mantra of politicians, bankers, and grocers. From off the peg to bespoke, Britain lost confidence in corporate giants and turned to the little guy. Searching for distinctiveness and individuality, the country eschewed the globalizing instincts associated with empire, peering further back in our history for an answer to the identity crisis of the 21st century. D, for dogs. Most of the chapters aren't what they say. Actually, you'll come to this as we go on. But this chapter is really about class. From the Middle Ages, when the breeding of the dog reflected the breeding of the master, Britain has frankly been fluent in the language of dog. We understand that the true identity of the owner can be defined by the breed at the end of the lead. Now, E is for error. I wanted to look at Britain's relationship with mistakes, with misjudgment, with carelessness. Thinking about our attitude to error, I realized just how our hostility to it has disfigured our politics and, I think, our way of life. We've become a society obsessed by personal risk management, where saying sorry becomes a political tactic. F is for family. As I suggest in the book, discussions about family quickly become personal because, well, frankly, it is personal. We all regard ourselves as something of an expert on the topic because we all, of course, have a family. I actually wanted to try and understand a paradox. We know that Britain has, the Conservatives have described as peculiarly high levels of family breakdown, which they say are fracturing British society. But when you ask people about their family life, you find that actually today people's confidence and happiness with family life is higher now than it's ever been. And I think this chapter, and I'm not going to spoil it for you because it's really exciting, does come to something of an answer to that paradox. So that's F is for family. G is for grass. In a way, though, this chapter is about, again, about our relationship with public space, as it was in B is for Bobbies. It's about Britain's struggle to walk on the grass, our obsession with bowling greens and football pitches and golf courses and cricket squares and grand estates and humble suburban lawns. Each blade of grass, I suggest, is a sharp reminder of the battles that shaped our nation. H is for happiness, and this chapter is a sort of, in itself, a sort of ladybird book of well-being. It's a sort of great sweep across time from Confucius, Plato, Gautama Buddha, 2,500 years, sort of wrestling with the idea of human progress and sort of taking it right up to the present day. So it's sort of a new reader's start here, sort of chapter on progress. I is for immigration. This chapter is actually about political deceit. It's an exploration of how the powerful have exploited natural xenophobia to achieve their ends, from Edward I to the present day. Fear of the outsider used as what I describe as sort of political diversionary tactic, a way of encouraging people to look over here rather than over there. I'm going to read a little bit from this chapter. Front of house, post-war Britain was anxious to appear honourable, generous and loyal. The uplifting narrative was of a nation that had defeated the vile racism of Nazi Germany by occupying the moral high ground. Even as it licked its wounds, Britain promised to stand foursquare with those to whom it owed a debt of gratitude, the people of the wider Commonwealth, whose citizens had joined in the fight against fascism. The newspapers were happy to endorse the idea of a multinational group hug, and there was little open opposition to the 1948 Nationality Act, reaffirming the right of free access to the United Kingdom for all 800 million subjects of the King around the world. Behind the scenes, however, secret cabinet documents reveal a tale of racism and duplicity. The government was doing everything it could to ensure only the right sort of immigrants came to help rebuild Britain's battered economy. The Colonial Office admitted to using devious little devices to discourage and restrict black and Asian immigration to Britain, covert administrative measures of questionable legality. J. I don't know whether you can see that particularly well. Those are all judges. So J is for justice. This chapter attempts to answer a question that has long bugged me. Why are the Brits so obsessed with crime? No big crime story is complete these days without the press conference at which the police display the injured and bereaved. The cameras flash at every hint of raw emotion. Suffering has become a key component of these contemporary morality tales. This changes the way we think of criminality, from an offence against the wider society to a matter of one individual harming another. It is a reversion to the principles of the ancient manor courts. It personalizes crime. One might say it consumerizes criminal justice. Victims sell papers, and the most effective are those who can be described as incontrovertibly innocent. The blameless victim has become the most influential voice in the national debate about law and order. K is yes, knives. This is really another exercise in the dark political arts and a reflection upon how our press and our politicians contrive to create myths. It's the story of the knife crime epidemic that never was. L. It's for learning. Kids today, can't sit still for a minute, simultaneously texting and cybersurfing, chatting on Facebook and the mobile, downloading a dance track while watching YouTube and supposedly doing their homework. But might our children be exhibiting exactly the skills to make Britain great in the 21st century? I argue in this chapter that if the British success of the 19th century was built upon creativity and innovation plus unskilled labour, and British decline in the 20th century was because it was a century in which innovation and creativity was linked with skilled labour, the next century, I'm suggesting, for developed countries in particular, will be about creativity and innovation and highly skilled labour. M is for murder. Always, of course. And I mentioned Britain's obsession with crime. Murder exerts, I think, a sort of primal fascination upon us. And this chapter is written in the style of a Morse whodunit. At the end, we all gather in the library, and I reveal the true culprit behind contemporary British homicide. N is for numbers. An extract to tell you about this chapter. When I was at school in the late 1960s, I remember my maths teacher standing proudly behind a very large cardboard box placed upon his desk. Slowly and with reverence, the box was opened, and an extraordinary apparatus lifted into view. "Boys," he began, "this is a calculator." A what? The word was new to us. But we instantly fell in love with the shiny metal contraption, a cross between a giant typewriter and an arcade slot machine. There was magic in the box of tricks on the teacher's desk. My children laugh when I tell them this story. To me, as a youngster, the complexity and scale of mathematical problems were reflected in the complexity and scale of the device needed to solve them. Today, the most challenging calculations can be handled by a puny, mundane slice of plastic. Technology has transformed our relationship with numbers. Where once we were enthralled to their mystique, we are now blasé. Common computer programs allow us to manipulate numerical data with ease, to sort, to rank, to engineer, to plot, and to conclude. Statistical analysis used to be the province of the expert mathematical mind. Now, any fool thinks he can do it. O is for opium. That, ladies and gentlemen, is Boots in Piccadilly, which occupies an important place in this chapter, a chapter which is really about Britain's traditional aversion to prohibition, arguing that we have always been reluctant accessories to an American moral crusade. P is for poverty. Britain is unusually unsympathetic towards the poor, and this chapter tries to understand why that might be. What I discovered is that Britain has a much higher than average group who believe in a just world, the idea that people generally get what they deserve and deserve what they get. In one experiment, people were asked about their attitudes and divided into two camps. So those who believed in a just world, basically you got what you deserved, and those who felt that it was not really quite like that and there was a lot of unfairness. Now, each group was then introduced to the mythical Lisa, a single mum on a very low income. Was she deserving of welfare, was the question. When told that sometimes she skipped meals so her child could eat, or that she was doing classes to try and improve her job prospects, those who believed in a just world thought her less deserving of aid, because she was demonstrating that she had the capacity to improve her situation. To be deserving was to be impotent, and she was not that. It's just an interesting, there's a specific, I think, or particular attitude towards poverty in Northern European countries, particularly Britain, in relation to their sort of views about the poor. Q is for Queen. This is it's about again, it's sort of a Ladybird book chapter, and it's about the argument between Thomas Paine and Walter Bagehot. The act of consecration is the most magical aspect of an English coronation, so extraordinary that history and the 1953 Coronation Committee decreed it must remain out of sight. In preparation, the Queen was disrobed of her crimson cloak. Her jewellery was removed, and the young Elizabeth was seated in King Edward's chair, an ancient and simple throne, clothed in a dress of purest white. It was a moment of high theatre. A golden canopy, held by 4 Knights of the Garter, was suspended above and around the monarch. A grander version of the cloth cabinet a conjurer might wheel onto stage before making his glamorous assistant disappear. While with the abbey almost silent, the Archbishop of Canterbury was handed the holy ampulla, a flask in the shape of an eagle wrought in solid gold. From the flask he poured some blessed oil and anointed the Queen in the form of a cross, on the palm of her hands, on the breast, and on the crown of her head. As he did so, he whispered these words, "Be thy head anointed with holy oil, as kings, priests, and prophets were anointed. So you be anointed, blessed and consecrated Queen over the peoples whom the Lord thy God given thee to rule and govern." In that instant, the viewing public were meant to believe that the Queen was transformed. As a newsreel commentator put it, the hallowing, a moment so old history can barely go deep enough to contain it. When the golden pall was removed and the cameras rolled onto the monarch once more, hey presto and hallelujah, Elizabeth had become associated with the divine. R is for regions. This map shows the ancient heptarchy, in England at least, the 7 kingdoms which supposedly jostled with each other over territory in the Dark Ages until the Vikings came along and killed them all and smashed it up. What this is really about is a chapter about Britain's dislike of straight lines and bureaucrats. S, this is for silly hats. This again flows from the idea that the British set themselves apart through eccentricity melded with heritage. The hats, I suggest, are silly for a sensible reason. That tourists, they flock to watch the changing of the guard because it reflects a typically British notion that nothing has really changed at all. T is for toilets. Okay, this chapter is really about bourgeois modesty. It's about middle-class values. I suggest in this that the shiny porcelain of the lavatory bowl acts as a mirror to the British class system. U is for umbrellas. Well, we undoubtedly obsess about the weather, but does our climate define us? Does the weather shape our national character? Moving on to V is for vegetables. From peasant fodder to superfood, from working-class staple to middle-class statement, from the humble turnip to the flowering baby courgette, our relationship with veg has been turned on its head. For King Henry VIII to have been seen eating a carrot stick would have been to betray England's social order, as shocking today as a YouTube clip of the Queen secretly guzzling a monster chicken bargain bucket. W is actually for, that's the World Wide Web. And this asks whether access to the internet will make British society function better or worse. Tony Blair once promised that he was going to have the whole of our society enjoying the benefits of being e-citizens within 5 years. Still today, around 10% of our population have never been on the internet and have no inclination to do so. Even when the government presented them with free computers, free training, not interested. And I think that poses some real challenges for our society. X. This is the question I'm asked more than any other. What is X for? And in this case, it is XXXX. It's an essay on swearing. And in fact, the way you swear is indicative of your station as top hats and shell suits. But in this country, we sprinkle expletives into our conversations in the same way that we splash vinegar onto our chips. The Americans use a swear word as a weapon. Y is for youth. Some thoughts in this chapter about the demonization of young people in Britain and the risks of creating an ever-widening generation gap, which brings me to Z, which is for Z. Yes, we started with alcohol, we end with a doze in a deck chair. It is a consideration of our relationship with sleep. There are now an estimated 13 million prescriptions for sleeping pills issued each year in Britain as the nation looks to the medicine cabinet for help in dropping off. At the same time, sales of energy drinks to keep people awake have been soaring. Analysts reckon Britain spends £1 billion a year on cans and bottles fizzing with stimulants. Coffee is also a £1 billion a year product, with corporate cafe chains barging their way onto every high street for a slice of the action. It has become relatively normal to begin the day with a jolting Americano and to close it with a dose of Zobiclone. From A to Z, where once it was simply dawn till dusk.